would treat him well and teach him valuable skills. But when the time came, something felt off. Mr. Hoffman didn't speak to Timothy directly, and Father Brennan seemed rushed, barely explaining the details. Within an hour, Timothy was in a wagon headed toward an unfamiliar farm, leaving behind the only home he had known. In the weeks that followed, more children left the orphanage under similar circumstances. Their departures were quick, often without the usual paperwork or notification. To the diocese, Sister Agnes grew increasingly uneasy. The children were going to families no one at Sacred Heart had ever dealt with, and when she tried to follow up, there were no responses, no letters, no visits, nothing. The children were simply gone. By the fall of 1863, the pattern had become impossible to ignore. 14 children, most between the ages of 10 and 16, had left the orphanage and vanished from all official records. They weren't listed as adopted. There were no follow-up reports, and worst of all, no one at the diocese seemed to be aware that these placements had even happened. Meanwhile, locals had started to notice something strange. Protestant families, who had never before interacted with the Catholic orphanage, were now seen with Irish Catholic children helping in the fields or tending livestock. These children bore the unmistakable look of institutional upbringing, the same pale skin, the same ill-fitting clothes, the same quiet, guarded manner. When neighbors asked where the children came from, the stories never matched. Some said the children were distant relatives, others claimed they were orphans from another town. The contradictions only deepened the mystery. In early 1865, Sister Agnes discovered a series of letters hidden in a locked drawer in Mother O'Malley's office. The correspondence was between Mother O'Malley and the Bishop of Philadelphia. The letters confirmed what she had begun to suspect: these children weren't being placed for charity or apprenticeship, they were being sold. Desperate to keep Sacred Heart running, Mother O'Malley had turned to Father Brennan's scheme. Wealthy Protestant farmers, struggling to find labor during the war, were willing to pay handsomely for young, able-bodied workers, and while formal adoptions required approval, documentation, and diocesan oversight, informal placements did not. Brennan had exploited that loophole. The letters detailed payments made in cash, or goods: wheat, livestock, or store credit in exchange for specific children. The most desirable were older boys who could work the fields, and younger girls suited for domestic labor. In several cases, children had been selected based on physical health and obedience. They were treated not as wards of the church, but as property. Mother O'Malley's tone in the letters shifted over time. At first, she expressed guilt and hesitation, but as the orphanage's financial crisis deepened, her language grew colder, more pragmatic. "Better a good farm than the streets of Philadelphia," she wrote in one letter. "Better bread and shelter than hunger and uncertainty." But Sister Agnes couldn't justify it. She believed the children had been betrayed, abandoned by the very people who were supposed to protect them. She tried to alert church officials, but by then, Brennan had left Sacred Heart, reassigned to a larger parish in Pittsburgh. Mother O'Malley resigned quietly in 1866, citing health concerns. The remaining sisters were transferred to other assignments, and Sacred Heart Orphanage was absorbed into a larger diocesan system. By 1870, the truth remained buried for more than a century, until the letters resurfaced during an archival review. In 2018, historians examining church property records found inconsistencies in Sacred Heart's financial ledgers, leading to the rediscovery of Sister Agnes's handwritten notes and the original correspondence between O'Malley and the bishop. The documents told a story long forgotten or deliberately ignored. Today, there is no marker, no memorial to the 14 missing children of Sacred Heart. Their names were not recorded in local cemeteries, nor are they listed in official adoption records. Their lives and likely their fates vanished into the fog of war-era Pennsylvania. Some may have survived, growing up on farms under different names. Others we may never know. What we do know is this: between 1862 and 1865, children disappeared from a Catholic orphanage, and no one was held accountable. No trials, no investigations, only silence. So, what do you think? Should the church acknowledge these stories publicly, or is it too late to make it right? Let me know in the comments, and if you're still here, you're one of the few who's willing to look into the darker corners of our history. Hit like if you believe these children deserve to be remembered, and subscribe if you're ready to help uncover the forgotten truths that others would rather leave buried. He told Sister Agnes that one of his neighbors, a man named Wilhelm Bear, had taken in a boy the previous summer. The child matched the description of Timothy Walsh: red hair, Irish accent, and a scar on his right hand from a burn. According to Jacob, Bear never mentioned adopting the boy or having any official paperwork. The child was treated not as part of the family, but as a laborer sleeping in the barn, working long hours in the fields, and rarely seen in town. Jacob had grown uncomfortable with the situation, but didn't know what to do until he heard about the bishop's investigation. He feared retaliation from his community, but his conscience wouldn't let him stay silent. Sister Agnes thanked him and immediately informed Bishop Kendrick. With Jacob's help, church officials and local authorities visited the Bear farm. The boy they found there was indeed Timothy Walsh, though he was thin, sunburned, and barely recognizable. He had not been mistreated physically, but he had been overworked and isolated. Timothy cried when he saw Sister Agnes. He hadn't written, he explained, because he was never allowed to. Timothy's recovery opened the door to further leads. Encouraged by his safe return, more community members came forward. A housemaid reported seeing a girl answering to Margaret Connolly's description, living with a wealthy family in York County. A retired school teacher remembered a boy named Sean who had been living with a miller in Chester. Piece by piece, the network began to unravel. By the summer of 1863, 5 of the 14 missing children had been located and returned to church custody. Their accounts, when they were ready to speak, confirmed what Sister Agnes had feared. The placements were never meant to be temporary. The children had been used as cheap labor, with little hope of returning to the orphanage, let alone finding real homes. The church moved swiftly. Sacred Heart Orphanage was shut down by the bishop's order. Its remaining children were relocated to institutions with better oversight, and the Sisters of Mercy were reassigned. Sister Agnes, however, was not punished for her role. Instead, she was quietly reassigned to a diocesan administrative office in Philadelphia, where she would work for the rest of her life to improve transparency and record-keeping in Catholic charities. Publicly, the church kept the scandal quiet. Newspapers of the time made only passing reference to irregularities at a rural orphanage, but within church circles, it became a case study in moral failure and the dangers of unchecked authority. Bishop Kendrick's personal notes, discovered decades later, show how deeply the case affected him. He referred to it as a wound on the conscience of our church. The 6 children, who were never found, including Margaret Connolly, remain officially missing to this day. Their fates are unknown, and the full extent of Father Brennan's operation was never entirely revealed. He was never seen or heard from again, but Sister Agnes never forgot. She kept a small, leather-bound notebook with the names, ages, and last known locations of every child who had vanished. In her later years, she added a line beneath each name, never forgotten. And maybe, in remembering them, we can ensure that their stories, though buried for generations, are finally heard. So if you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. These are the parts of history that rarely make the textbooks, but they matter, and remembering them might be the only justice these children ever receive. Others, including Margaret Connolly and Ellen McMahon, were never located, despite extensive efforts by federal agents, church officials, and local authorities. The trail simply ended. Some families claimed the children had run away. Others insisted they had died from illness or accidents, but none could provide documentation. In most cases, no graves were found, no reports filed, just silence. Father Brennan was arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes, including kidnapping, human trafficking, and conspiracy. His trial drew national attention and exposed deep cracks in both church oversight and the broader social systems meant to protect vulnerable children. Witnesses included former orphanage staff, surviving children, and even former collaborators who had struck deals in exchange for leniency. The jury took less than a day to convict Brennan on all counts, he was sentenced to life in federal prison, where he died 7 years later without expressing remorse. The Catholic Church quietly reassigned several priests implicated in the network, and while some reforms were introduced, stricter record-keeping, independent oversight of orphanages, few were ever held publicly accountable beyond Brennan. Sister Agnes never returned to religious service after Sacred Heart closed. She spent her remaining years working quietly in Catholic charities, helping to improve standards of care for children. Her private journals, discovered after her death, included detailed notes on every child she had known at Sacred Heart, those who remained, those who were returned, and those who were never seen again. The Sacred Heart scandal faded from public memory in the years after the Civil War, buried beneath the nation's larger struggles. But for the families affected, and for those who tried to make sense of what happened, it remained an open-wound reminder of what can happen when institutions meant to protect instead choose to exploit. And perhaps most haunting of all were the names that never made it into official reports, the missing children who were never found, never identified, and never properly mourned. In the end, it was Sister Agnes who left behind the clearest record of their existence. One line written beneath each name in her careful hand, gone, but not forgotten. If stories like this resonate with you, and you believe it's important to remember the ones history tried to erase, consider subscribing. These stories matter, and remembering them is the least we can do. Children like Timothy Walsh and Margaret Connolly were still missing. Some had been sold to families who later moved west, beyond the reach of federal authorities. Others were said to have died or run away, but the families who claimed this couldn't offer any real proof. As the investigation widened, it became clear that not every child had been sold simply for labor. 3 had ended up in the home of a wealthy Philadelphia merchant, who kept them as unpaid domestic servants, isolating them completely from the outside world. 2 others were sold to a plantation owner in Virginia, where they were forced to work alongside enslaved African Americans, creating a grim reality in which Irish Catholic children lived under conditions indistinguishable from slavery. What disturbed investigators most was the evidence suggesting that some children were sold for reasons even darker than forced labor. At least 3 were knowingly sent to homes where they were exploited for what official documents described only as personal service. Though the records were sealed and hidden from the public for more than 100 years, they strongly suggest that some children had been trafficked into sexual slavery. The scope of Father Brennan's operation became fully apparent when investigators found that he had maintained detailed files on the children listing their age, appearance, health, and temperament. Buyers could browse these records and choose the child who best met their needs. Prices varied depending on age and physical ability. When confronted with the evidence, Mother Superior Catherine O'Malley reportedly suffered a total breakdown. She had truly believed that Brennan was helping children find better homes. Learning that she had unknowingly facilitated human trafficking left her emotionally shattered. She was removed from leadership and spent the rest of her life in a convent infirmary. Never again able to speak clearly about her time at Sacred Heart, Sister Agnes, despite her role in exposing the truth, was overcome with guilt. She had suspected wrongdoing early on, but her loyalty to church hierarchy kept her from acting. By the time she did, it was too late to save many of the children. She left the orphanage soon after the Yoda Farm investigation and dedicated the rest of her life to working with formerly enslaved people in the South. Hoping to find some form of redemption through service, Father Brennan's trial became one of the most widely followed court cases of the Civil War era. The prosecution charged him under new federal anti-trafficking laws, comparing his actions to the slave trade that the Union was trying to end. Brennan's defense argued that he had only wanted to help children and relieve pressure on church-run institutions, but the weight of the evidence, abuse, exploitation, deception was undeniable. Testimony from the rescued children was harrowing. Shaw McMahon told the court he had worked up to 18 hours a day during harvest season and was beaten whenever he showed signs of fatigue. Ellen McMahon said she had to sleep in an unheated shed through the winter and often woke up to find frost on her blanket. Other children described being forbidden from speaking their native languages, denied medical care, and threatened if they tried to contact anyone from their past. The most devastating account came from 12-year-old Bridget O'Sullivan, who had been sold to a family in Baltimore County. She said she worked from dawn until midnight, slept on the kitchen floor, and was fed only leftovers. When she tried to run away, they locked her in a root cellar without food or water for 3 days. The family had told neighbors she was a mentally challenged relative in order to avoid questions. Throughout the trial, Father Brennan showed no remorse. Before sentencing, he gave a long speech defending his actions. He claimed he had been helping children escape poverty by placing them with Protestant families who could provide them with work and Christian values. His only regret, he said, was not being able to help more of them. The jury returned guilty verdicts on all charges. After less than 2 hours of deliberation, Brennan was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. His co-conspirators received between 5 and 15 years. The judge called their crimes a betrayal of moral and religious responsibility and condemned their abuse of spiritual authority as the most despicable form of slavery. The Sacred Heart Orphanage never recovered from the scandal. The Catholic Diocese of Philadelphia shut it down in 1864 and moved the remaining children elsewhere. The building was sold to a Protestant group and turned into a seminary, but that too failed within a few years. Locals said the building felt cursed. Strange accidents plagued every attempt to reopen it. Authorities kept searching for the 6 missing children. In 1867, someone matching Timothy Walsh's description was reportedly seen working on a farm in Ohio. But when investigators arrived, the family had vanished. Margaret Connolly was rumored to be working as a servant in Virginia, but she disappeared again before help could reach her. The other 4, Patrick Murphy, Bridget O'Brien, and 2 unnamed children whose identities had been deliberately erased, were never found. They may have died in silence, buried without records, or survived under false names, carrying their trauma into adulthood. Many of the rescued children never fully recovered. They struggled with what we would now call PTSD, nightmares, anxiety, and deep mistrust of authority. Some ran away from their new placements, choosing life on the streets rather than risk more abuse. The case strained Catholic-Protestant relations in Pennsylvania and beyond. For Protestant communities already skeptical of Catholic institutions, the scandal confirmed their worst fears, and Catholic leaders, now under pressure from all sides, struggled to repair the damage. The Sacred Heart case led to sweeping reforms. Federal authorities began imposing stricter rules on religious institutions, including regular inspections and formal documentation for child placements. These changes helped prevent similar abuses in the future, but they came far too late for the 14 children who had vanished. Marshal James Crawford, who led the investigation, continued looking for the missing children for years. In 1870, he submitted his final report. "The trail of these innocents has grown cold," he wrote. "They were consumed by a system that valued their labor over their lives." Sister Agnes's private notes, kept in secret and later archived by the diocese, were crucial in documenting what had happened. They revealed not only the extent of the trafficking network, but also the care she had for the children. Her records included names, ages, habits, fears, small, intimate details that proved they were more than victims. They were individuals. Next to Timothy Walsh's name, she wrote, "Red hair, freckles, scar on left hand from kitchen accident, dreamed of being a teacher, afraid of thunderstorms. Last seen June 15, 1862. God forgive us all." Similar notations followed each name, forming a quiet, heartbreaking memorial. After the orphanage closed, the building sat empty for nearly a decade. Residents reported strange occurrences: lights in windows, the sound of children's voices fueling local rumors that the place was haunted, whether real or imagined. The building became a symbol of collective guilt. In 1874, it was torn down, officially. The reason was safety concerns, but locals knew the truth. It was a monument no one wanted to see. The bricks were reused to build a courthouse in Lancaster, where they still stand today. In 1925, a small granite marker was placed on the old orphanage grounds. It reads, "In memory of the innocent children who suffered here, may they find in death the peace they were denied in life." Even that simple tribute stirred controversy. Some wanted to forget. Others believed the memory should be preserved. Father Brennan died in prison in 1881, 2 years before completing his sentence. Officially, he died of pneumonia, though records note a long decline attributed to melancholia, possibly a late realization of what he had done. He was buried in an unmarked grave, his name omitted from any records or memorials. The other priests involved faced punishment, including defrocking. Efforts to trace the families who had bought children led nowhere. Many had moved west beyond the reach of federal law. The children in their care vanished into the wide, anonymous frontier. The Sacred Heart scandal led to major changes in how child welfare was handled. Religious charities were no longer exempt from oversight. New laws required transparency and inspections, but the reforms came at a price: a deep, lasting distrust of institutions once assumed to be safe. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from the tragedy was that no institution, religious or otherwise, should be trusted without accountability. Power, when combined with prejudice and desperation, can lead to horrifying abuses. The 14 children who disappeared between 1862 and 1865 were lost in a perfect storm of war, poverty, and corruption. Their names may never be fully known. Their stories were nearly forgotten, but their suffering reminds us of the cost of silence and the importance of watching over those who cannot protect themselves. What do you think? Was the full truth ever uncovered, or do you believe some secrets still lie buried in Pennsylvania's hills? Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Could some of the children have survived, living quiet lives under new names? If this story moved you, and you want more forgotten chapters from our past, subscribe, hit the bell, and share this with someone who loves uncovering history's hidden corners. We'll see you in the next video, where another long-buried mystery is waiting to be unearthed.